The crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the marble ballroom as my aunt's voice cut through the elegant chatter like a knife through silk. "There she is," Diane announced, her voice dripping with condescension as she pointed across the crowded room. "Our little coffee shop girl, pretending she belongs with the real professionals." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The conversation around our family's table died instantly. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. My cousin Trevor smirked behind his wine glass while my mother, Patricia, shook her head in embarrassment. The annual Pinnacle Industries gala was supposed to be the highlight of Ravensbrook's social calendar, but for me, it had just become a public execution. "Maya works very hard," my father Robert said weakly, though even he couldn't meet my eyes. Diane let out a sharp laugh that made nearby tables turn. "Hard? She pours coffee for a living, Robert." At 28 years old, while her cousins are buying houses and starting real careers, she's still asking, "Would you like extra foam with that?" My hands trembled as I gripped my clutch purse, the cheap beaded fabric suddenly feeling like sandpaper against my palms. Around us, Ravensbrook's elite mingled in their designer gowns and $1,000 suits, completely unaware that my family was dismantling me piece by piece at table 7. "It's honest work," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the string quartet playing near the ornate fountain. "Honest." My Uncle Gerald leaned forward, his face red from too much champagne. "Maya, you have a college degree. A degree we all helped pay for, I might add. And you're wasting its steaming milk at some hipster coffee joint called," he snapped his fingers impatiently. "Moonbeam Cafe," Trevor supplied helpfully, grinning. "I drive past it sometimes, always wondered who actually works at those places." The words hit like physical blows. Moonbeam Cafe wasn't just some random coffee shop. It was my sanctuary, my second home, the place where I'd spent 3 years building relationships with customers who knew my name, who asked about my weekend plans, who trusted me with their morning routines and their daily struggles. But to my family, it was just another symbol of my failure to live up to their expectations. "The girl has no ambition," Diane continued, her voice growing louder as more champagne disappeared from her glass. "No drive, no vision for her future. Do you know what her cousin Brittany makes at her marketing firm? 6 figures, Maya. 6 figures." I watched my cousin Brittany shift uncomfortably in her chair, clearly embarrassed by being used as ammunition against me. But she didn't speak up. None of them ever did. My mother finally looked at me, her eyes filled with that familiar mixture of disappointment and pity that had haunted my childhood. "Sweetheart, we're just worried about you. You're so bright, so capable, it breaks our hearts to see you settling for so little." Settling. The word lodged in my throat like a splinter. Was I settling? Every morning at 5:30 a.m., when I unlocked the cafe doors, was I settling? When I perfected latte art for customers who lit up at the heart-shaped foam, was I settling? When I managed inventory, trained new employees, and handled the books because the owner trusted me completely, was I settling? "This is supposed to be a nice evening," I said, desperately trying to steer the conversation away from my apparent failures. "Can we please just enjoy the party?" Gerald scoffed. "Enjoy watching you embarrass yourself? Maya, look around. See that woman in the blue gown? She's the head of pediatrics at Ravensbrook General. The man in the navy suit? He owns 3 restaurants downtown. These are successful people, accomplished people." "And what are you?" Diane added, her words slurring slightly. "You're the family charity case. The one we all whisper about at Christmas dinner." Poor Maya, still pouring coffee. Poor Maya, never figured her life out. The ballroom suddenly felt suffocating, the beautiful music became noise. The elegant decorations felt like a stage set mocking my simple life. I could feel other guests glancing our way, drawn by my family's increasingly loud dissection of my worth as a human being. Maybe I should go, I said, starting to stand.
Oh, don't run away, Trevor called out. We're just getting started. Tell everyone about your big dreams, Maya. Are you going to work your way up to shift supervisor? Maybe one day you'll manage your own coffee cart. The laughter that followed felt like glass breaking inside my chest. But just as the humiliation reached its peak, just as I was about to flee from the ballroom and never speak to any of them again, a voice cut through the chaos with the precision of a sword. Maya Rodriguez? The voice was deep, confident, and coming from directly behind me. I turned slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs, to see a tall man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit approaching our table. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his smile was warm but commanding, and pinned to his lapel was a small badge that made my blood run cold. It read, Alexander Thornton, CEO, Pinnacle Industries. My family's table fell silent so quickly you could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Maya Rodriguez from Moonbeam Cafe, he continued, extending his hand with a smile that could have powered the chandelier above us. I've been hoping to run into you tonight. I stared at him, my mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. My Aunt Diane's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the table, sending crystal fragments skittering across the white tablecloth. And that's when I realized that everything I thought I knew about my life, my worth, and my place in the world was about to change forever. My name is Maya Rodriguez, and if you're watching this, prepare yourself for a story about how the people who claim to love you the most can sometimes see you the least clearly. About how success isn't always measured in salary figures and job titles, and about how the universe has a funny way of delivering justice exactly when you need it most. But before I tell you how the most powerful man in Ravensbrook knew my name, and why that knowledge would turn my family's world upside down, I need you to understand how we got here. Because this story doesn't start at the gala. It starts 3 years earlier, with a desperate young woman, a struggling coffee shop, and a decision that would change everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let me rewind and tell you who I really am, because the woman standing frozen at that gala table isn't the whole story. My name is Maya Rodriguez, and I'm 28 years old. I live in a cramped studio apartment above Hendrick's hardware store on Maple Street in downtown Ravensbrook, where the radiator clanks all night and the neighbor's cat somehow finds a way onto my fire escape every morning. My car is a 2015 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and a check engine light that's been on for 8 months. I shop at discount grocery stores, clip coupons, and haven't bought a piece of clothing that wasn't on clearance in over 2 years. By every metric my family uses to measure success, I am failing spectacularly. But here's what I want you to understand, and I need you to really hear this. Have you ever been judged for a life that brings you genuine happiness? Have you ever had people you love look at you like you're broken simply because your version of success doesn't match their blueprint? Because that's been my reality for 3 years now, ever since I made what my family considers the worst decision of my adult life. I have a bachelor's degree in business administration from Ravensbrook University. Graduated summa cum laude, actually. My parents threw a party. My relatives sent congratulations cards. And everyone assumed I'd follow the traditional path. Corporate job. Steady climb up the ladder. House in the suburbs. 2-car garage. The whole American dream package. Instead, I fell in love with a struggling coffee shop and decided to pour my heart into something that made me wake up excited every morning. Let me paint you a picture of my typical day, because I want you to understand what my family sees versus what I experience. I wake up at 5:15 a.m. without an alarm clock, not because I have to, but because I genuinely look forward to starting my day. I walk 3 blocks through quiet streets where I know every crack in the sidewalk, every house where the porch light stays on all night, every dog that barks behind the white picket fence on Elm Street. Moonbeam Cafe sits on the corner of 3rd and Oak, in a converted Victorian house with purple shutters and a wraparound porch that's seen better days. The paint is chipping, the floorboards creak, and the espresso machine is older than some of our customers. But when I unlock those doors at 6 a.m. and flip on the string lights we hung around the windows, magic happens. Mrs. Holloway, who's 73 and walks her ancient Beagle Buster every morning, comes in for her decaf vanilla latte and tells me about her granddaughter's piano recitals. James, the postal worker, stops by for his double-shot Americano, and we discuss whatever mystery novel he's reading. Sarah, the young mom with twins, needs her caramel macchiato and 5 minutes of adult conversation before her day explodes into chaos. These people don't see a college graduate wasting her potential. They see Maya, who remembers their orders, asks about their lives, and creates a space where they feel seen and valued. They see someone who turned a dying business into the heartbeat of our little downtown district. But my family? They see failure. She could be making $60,000 a year at Davidson and Associates, my mother tells her bridge club. Instead, she's making $12 an hour plus tips. What they don't mention is that I also manage the inventory, handle the bookkeeping, train new employees, and single-handedly design the loyalty program that increased our customer retention by 40%. They don't mention that I've turned this place from a coffee shop on the verge of bankruptcy into a thriving community hub. They don't mention it because they don't know it. They've never asked. To them, I'm the cautionary tale, the smart girl who lost her way. The daughter who embarrasses them at family gatherings when people ask what I do for a living. I've watched my mother's face fall every time she has to say, Maya works at a coffee shop, while her sister brags about Brittany's promotion or Trevor's new company car. I've sat through countless dinner conversations where my life choices are dissected like a failed science experiment, where well-meaning relatives offer to make some calls and get me back on track, where my happiness is dismissed as delusion and my satisfaction is seen as settling. And maybe you're watching this thinking they have a point. Maybe you're wondering if I really am wasting my education, my potential, my life on something trivial. But here's what I've learned in 3 years of disappointing my family. Sometimes the life that looks small from the outside feels infinite from the inside. Sometimes success isn't about the size of your paycheck or the prestige of your job title. Sometimes it's about building something meaningful, one perfect latte at a time. I love my work, I love my customers. I love the smell of fresh coffee beans and the sound of milk steaming and the way someone's face lights up when you remember exactly how they like their drink. I love being part of people's daily routines, their small moments of comfort in a chaotic world. But loving something your family considers beneath you is exhausting. Living with their disappointment is like carrying a weight that gets heavier every time you see them. And after 3 years of being treated like the family failure, I was starting to believe maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a college graduate playing barista. Maybe I was wasting my life on something that didn't matter. That's the mindset I carried into the Pinnacle Industries gala that night. That's why my family's words cut so deep. Why their laughter felt so devastating. I had no idea that everything I thought I knew about my worth, my impact, and my place in the world was about to be completely rewritten by a conversation that started 3 years ago with a customer I barely remembered serving. A customer who, it turns out, had never forgotten me. It all started 6 months ago at my cousin Brittany's engagement party, when my family's disappointment in me crystallized into something much more toxic, active shame. The party was held at the Ravensbrook Country Club, naturally. Crystal stemware, imported flowers, servers in crisp white uniforms carrying silver trays of hors d'oeuvre that cost more than I made in a week. Brittany looked radiant in her designer dress, showing off her engagement ring to a circle of admiring relatives, while her fiancé, a corporate lawyer named Wellington, discussed investment portfolios with the men. I'd driven straight from work, still smelling faintly of espresso, despite changing clothes in the cafe's tiny bathroom. My dress was a simple black number from a department store clearance rack, appropriate but unremarkable among the sea of designer labels surrounding me. Maya! Brittany squealed when she spotted me, rushing over with her ring finger strategically positioned to catch the light. You made it! I was worried you'd have to work late at your little coffee place. The way she said little coffee place, with that particular tone reserved for discussing something adorable but ultimately insignificant, should have been my first warning sign. Wouldn't miss it for the world, I replied, genuinely happy for her, despite the subtle condescension. Brittany and I had been close as children, before careers and life choices created invisible walls between us. But it was my Uncle Gerald who turned what should have been a celebration into my public trial. "Maya," he boomed, approaching with a martini in one hand and my Aunt Diane on his arm. "There's our little barista, still playing house with coffee beans, I see." Playing house. As if 3 years of building a business, managing operations, and creating a community gathering place was just an extended game of pretend. "Actually, I've been promoted to assistant manager," I said, trying to inject some pride into my voice. "I handle most of the day-to-day operations now." Gerald's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Assistant manager of a coffee shop. Well, I suppose someone has to do it." That's when my mother, Patricia, decided to join the conversation, bringing reinforcements in the form of my father and several other relatives who had apparently been discussing my life choices while I wasn't around to defend myself. "We've been talking, sweetheart," Mom said, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when she thought she was being helpful but was actually being devastating. "And we think it's time for an intervention." An intervention. The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. "Your cousin just landed a promotion to senior marketing director," my father added, nodding toward Brittany, who was now looking extremely uncomfortable. "She's making $95,000 a year plus bonuses." Wellington here started his own practice and bought them a house in Willowbrook Estates. Wellington, bless him, at least had the grace to look embarrassed by being used as a weapon against me. "That's wonderful for them," I managed. "I'm really happy." "The point," Diane interrupted, "is that you're wasting your life. You have a degree, Maya, a good education that we all helped pay for. And you're throwing it away to play coffee shop with people who will never amount to anything." The cruelty of that statement, dismissing not just me, but every customer I served, every relationship I'd built, every small joy I'd found in my work, hit me like a physical blow. "My job isn't just about making coffee," I said, my voice getting smaller despite my efforts to sound confident. "I manage inventory worth thousands of dollars. I handle payroll, scheduling, vendor relationships. I've increased revenue by 30% since I started. I'm building real business skills." "Skills that will get you what?" Gerald cut me off. "A job managing a slightly bigger coffee shop?" "Maya, you're 28 years old. Your biological clock is ticking. Your earning potential is stagnating. And you're wasting the best years of your life on a dead-end job that's going nowhere." Around us, other party guests had begun to notice the commotion. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. I could feel the weight of their attention, their judgment, their pity for the family's disappointment case being publicly dressed down at what should have been a celebration. "Look at your cousins," Mom continued, gesturing around the room. "Trevor just bought a condo downtown. Brittany's getting married to a successful professional. Your cousin Rachel is finishing her residency and will be a doctor next year. What do you have to show for the last 3 years?" What did I have to show? I had regulars who trusted me with their morning routines and their daily struggles. I had a business that was thriving because I cared about every detail. I had the satisfaction of creating something meaningful in a world that often felt disconnected and impersonal. But how do you explain that to people who measure worth in salary figures and status symbols? "I have a job I love," I said weakly. "I have financial independence. Financial independence?" Diane's voice rose sharply enough to draw even more attention. "Maya, you live in a studio apartment above a hardware store. You drive a car that's falling apart. You shop at thrift stores and clip coupons like you're living in the Great Depression." "There's nothing wrong with being frugal," I protested. "There's everything wrong with having no ambition," Gerald exploded. "Do you plan to serve coffee until you're 60? Do you plan to retire on tips and good intentions? What happens when your back gives out from standing all day? When your feet can't handle the constant walking? When you're too old to keep up with the pace?" The questions hit like hammer blows, each one exposing fears I'd tried not to think about. What was my long-term plan? What was my career trajectory? What would I have to show for my life when I was their age? "We're staging an intervention," Mom announced, her voice carrying across half the party. "Because we love you too much to watch you destroy your future." An intervention, as if my happiness was an addiction that needed to be cured. "We've been in touch with Davidson and Associates," my father said, pulling out his phone. "Richard Davidson is an old friend from college. He's willing to interview you for an entry-level position in their accounting department." "It's not much to start," maybe 45,000, but it's a real career with real potential. $45,000. In their minds, that was rescue. That was salvation from the poverty they imagined I was living in. The interview is next Thursday, Mom added. We already confirmed you're available. They had scheduled a job interview for me, without asking, without consulting me, without any consideration for the fact that I might not want to be saved from a life that brought me genuine joy. What if I say no? I asked quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Every relative within earshot turned to stare. The string quartet playing near the garden seemed to grow louder in the sudden absence of conversation. Gerald's face darkened. Then you're a fool, he said flatly. And we'll have to accept that we failed to raise you with any sense of ambition or self-respect. Diane nodded vigorously. It would break our hearts to see you waste your life out of stubbornness, but at some point, we have to stop enabling your poor choices. Enabling. As if supporting my right to choose my own path was somehow harmful to me. Think about it this way, my mother said, her voice gentler but somehow more devastating. What would your grandmother think if she could see you now? She immigrated to this country with nothing, worked 2 jobs to put your grandfather through school, sacrificed everything so her children could have better lives. And this is what you're doing with the opportunities she died to give you? The guilt hit like a tsunami. My grandmother, Rosa Rodriguez, had been my hero. She'd worked as a seamstress and a house cleaner while raising 4 children and supporting my grandfather's dream of becoming a teacher. She'd saved every penny to help pay for my education, telling me stories about the opportunities available to smart girls in America. What would she think of her granddaughter choosing to serve coffee when she could work in an office? But then I remembered something else about my grandmother. She'd chosen love over money when she married my grandfather, a dreamer who wanted to teach instead of pursuing more lucrative work. She'd chosen family over status when she moved to Ravensbrook instead of staying in the bigger city where my grandfather could have made more money. She'd chosen meaning over prestige every single day of her life. Maybe she'd understand better than they thought. But standing there, surrounded by my family's disappointment and disgust, drowning in their certainty that I was ruining my life, I felt that understanding slip away. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just scared of real responsibility. Maybe I was hiding behind the comfortable smallness of my coffee shop world. That night planted seeds of doubt that grew over the following months, watered by every family dinner where I was the cautionary tale, every gathering where my life was held up as an example of wasted potential. By the time the Pinnacle Industries gala arrived, those seeds had blossomed into a garden of self-doubt that was choking out my confidence, my joy, and my belief in my own choices. Which is why Alexander Thornton's appearance at our table felt like divine intervention arriving at the exact moment I needed it most. The weeks following Brittany's engagement party became a coordinated campaign designed to break down my resistance and force me into the life my family had chosen for me. It started with phone calls. Daily phone calls from my mother, each one carefully crafted to chip away at my confidence like water wearing down stone. I spoke to Mrs. Henderson from church today, she'd say, during her morning check-ins. Her daughter just got promoted to regional manager at the bank. She's only 26, Maya, 2 years younger than you, and she's already supervising 12 people. Or, your father ran into Mr. Davidson at the grocery store. He mentioned the position is still available, but he won't hold it much longer. These opportunities don't come around every day, sweetheart. The calls always ended the same way. We just want what's best for you. We love you too much to watch you settle for less than you deserve. But it wasn't just phone calls. My family had weaponized their entire social network against me. At the post office, where I went to mail invoices for the cafe, the clerk, Mrs. Patterson, who'd known my family for 20 years, felt compelled to share her thoughts. Your mother tells me you're thinking about getting back into the corporate world, she said with a knowing smile. Good for you, dear. It's never too late to get serious about your future. At the grocery store, my high school guidance counselor approached me in the cereal aisle. Maya Rodriguez, I heard you're interviewing with Davidson and Associates. I always knew you had too much potential to waste on service work. Service work? As if serving others was inherently degrading. As if creating moments of connection and comfort in people's daily lives was somehow less valuable than pushing papers in a corporate office. Even worse were the ambush visits to the cafe itself. 3 weeks before the gala, my Aunt Diane showed up during the lunch rush with 2 of her book club friends in tow. They ordered complicated drinks: a half-calf soy latte with sugar-free vanilla and extra hot, a decaf macchiato with oat milk and extra foam, and a regular coffee with exactly 2 sugars and a splash of cream, then stood at the counter watching me work with expressions that mixed pity and fascination. "This is Maya," Diane announced to her friends as I steamed milk for their drinks. "My niece I was telling you about. The one with the business degree who's been playing barista for 3 years." Playing barista. The phrase made my hands shake as I tried to create the perfect microphone for the macchiato. "She's very good at it," one of the friends observed, as if she were commenting on a performing animal. "Look how fast she moves." "Oh, she's always been talented," Diane replied. "That's what makes this whole situation so tragic. All that intelligence and education, and this is what she's doing with it." I could feel other customers listening, their conversations quieting as they absorbed this public dissection of my life choices. Mr. Holloway, who came in every Tuesday for his black coffee and blueberry muffin, looked embarrassed for me. Sarah, the young mom with twins, shot me a sympathetic glance while bouncing her fussy daughter on her hip. But the worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was the seed of doubt that Diane's words planted in my regular customers' minds. Over the following days, I noticed subtle changes. Conversations that used to flow naturally became stilted. People who used to linger and chat began taking their drinks to go. The easy camaraderie I'd built over 3 years started to crack under the weight of my family's public judgment. The pressure escalated further when my cousin Trevor decided to help by staging his own intervention during what should have been a quiet Saturday morning shift. He arrived with his girlfriend Kendall and 2 of his fraternity brothers from college, all of them dressed in expensive workout clothes and carrying the kind of confidence that comes from never having to question your place in the world. "Maya," Trevor called out cheerfully as they approached the counter, "we need fuel for our workout. 4 large coffees with extra shots. We're heading to that new CrossFit gym downtown. You know, the one that costs more per month than you probably make here." The dig was subtle but sharp, delivered with a smile that made it even more poisonous. "Coming right up," I said, forcing professionalism into my voice despite the knot forming in my stomach. As I prepared their drinks, Trevor launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech for the benefit of his audience. "You know, guys, this is my cousin Maya. She's brilliant. Graduated summa cum laude from Ravensbrook University with a business degree. Could have done anything with her life. Investment banking, consulting, corporate law. The sky was the limit." His friends made appropriately impressed noises while I ground coffee beans with more force than necessary. "But instead," Trevor continued, his voice taking on a tone of exaggerated disappointment, "she chose to become a professional coffee maker. Tell them about your career goals, Maya. Are you planning to open your own chain of coffee shops? Become the next Starbucks mogul?" The question was designed to expose what my family saw as the fundamental flaw in my life. I had no grand ambitions. I wasn't building an empire or climbing a corporate ladder. I was simply doing work that brought me satisfaction and served my community. "I'm happy where I am," I said quietly, concentrating on creating perfect latte art to avoid meeting anyone's eyes. "Happy," Trevor repeated, as if the word tasted bitter. "Guys, she's happy making $12 an hour plus tips, in this economy, at 28 years old. One of his friends, a guy named Brad who worked in tech sales, shook his head in apparent disbelief. "Dude, my younger sister makes more than that babysitting. She's 16. The comparison was devastating in its casual cruelty. My worth as an adult professional reduced to less than that of a teenager's part-time job. "The thing is," Trevor continued, clearly enjoying his captive audience, "our family keeps trying to help her. We've set up job interviews, made connections, opened doors. But she keeps choosing this." He gestured around the cafe with the kind of dismissive wave you'd use to indicate a garbage dump. "It's like she's addicted to underachievement," Kendall added helpfully. "Some people are just afraid of success, you know? Afraid of success." The phrase hit me like a slap, partly because it voiced a fear I'd been trying not to acknowledge. Was I afraid? Was I hiding behind the comfortable smallness of my coffee shop world because I was scared of failing at something bigger? The worst part was that other customers were absorbing this narrative. I could see it in their faces. The subtle shift from seeing me as Maya, who made their perfect morning coffee, to seeing me as Maya, the underachiever, who was wasting her education on menial work. Mrs. Chen, who owned the flower shop next door and often stopped by for afternoon tea, looked genuinely confused. "I didn't know you had a business degree," she said, after Trevor's group left. "Why aren't you using it?" The question haunted me because I didn't have a good answer. Not one that made sense to people who measured success in traditional terms. How do you explain that you are using your degree, just not in the way everyone expected? How do you describe the business skills involved in managing inventory, analyzing sales patterns, and building customer loyalty when those skills are applied to a coffee shop instead of a corporation? By the time the Pinnacle Industries gala arrived, my family's campaign had achieved its intended effect. My confidence was shattered. My sense of purpose was shaken. The joy I'd found in my work was poisoned by constant questions about whether I was wasting my life. I'd started having panic attacks during quiet moments at the cafe, wondering if everyone who looked at me saw what my family saw: a failure, a disappointment, a cautionary tale about squandered potential. The invitation to the gala had come through my mother, who'd been invited as the wife of a Pinnacle Industries supplier. "It's black tie," she'd informed me. Professional networking. The kind of event where you meet people who can actually help your career. The implication was clear. This was my chance to see what success really looked like, to mingle with people who'd made something of themselves, to finally understand what I was missing by clinging to my small, insignificant life. I'd almost declined to attend. The thought of spending an evening surrounded by Ravensbrook's elite while my family dissected my failures was nauseating. But some stubborn part of me, maybe the last vestige of my former confidence, insisted on going. I needed to prove to myself that I could hold my head up in that world, even if I'd chosen not to be part of it. What I didn't know was that the evening would become the culmination of my family's crusade against my choices, the moment when their disappointment would reach its crescendo in the most public way possible. And I certainly didn't know that the universe was about to provide the most spectacular vindication imaginable, delivered by a man whose connection to my small coffee shop world would reframe everything my family thought they knew about success, value, and the true meaning of a life well lived. The week before the Pinnacle Industries gala, my family presented me with an ultimatum that would force me to choose between everything I'd built and everything they believed I should become. It was Sunday dinner at my parents' house on Elm Street, the same house where I'd grown up, with its faded yellow siding and the oak tree in the front yard that still held the remnants of my childhood tire swing. These dinners had been a weekly tradition for as long as I could remember, but lately they'd become exercises in endurance rather than family bonding. I should have known something was different when I arrived, to find not just my immediate family, but also Uncle Gerald, Aunt Diane, Trevor, and even Brittany with her fiancé Wellington. The dining room table had been extended with its rarely used leaf, set with my grandmother's good china, and the atmosphere hummed with the kind of nervous energy that preceded major announcements. "Maya, sweetheart, sit here," my mother directed, patting the chair directly across from my father at the head of the table. The placement felt deliberate, strategic, like I was being positioned for cross-examination rather than dinner. The conversation during the meal was carefully orchestrated small talk: Wellington's law practice, Brittany's wedding planning, Trevor's recent promotion to senior account executive. I noticed how every topic seemed to highlight someone else's professional advancement, their upward trajectory, their growing success. By contrast, when Uncle Gerald asked about my work, the question felt perfunctory, almost dismissive. "Still enjoying your coffee adventures?" he asked, with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Very much," I replied, though my voice sounded smaller than I intended. "We just introduced a new seasonal menu, and our customer loyalty program has been incredibly successful. We've increased repeat visits by 45%. The statistics I'd once shared with pride now felt defensive, like I was trying to justify my existence rather than celebrating genuine achievements. "That's nice, dear," Aunt Diane said in a tone that suggested it was anything but nice. "Though I suppose customer loyalty is easier to achieve when you're dealing with people who just want their morning caffeine fix." The dismissal stung, reducing my customers, people I genuinely cared about, whose names and stories I knew, whose daily struggles and small victories I'd become part of, to caffeine addicts seeking their next fix. It was during dessert, as my mother served her famous apple pie with vanilla ice cream, that they revealed the real purpose of this family gathering. Maya, my father began, his voice taking on the formal tone he used for serious conversations. We've been talking, and we've decided it's time for some tough love. Tough love. The phrase made my stomach clench with anticipation of whatever was coming next. We love you, my mother added quickly, as if that disclaimer would soften whatever blow was about to land. We love you too much to continue enabling what's become a destructive pattern. Enabling, destructive pattern. The clinical language made my life sound like a diagnosis rather than a choice. Uncle Gerald cleared his throat and pulled out a manila folder from beside his chair. We've taken the liberty of doing some research on your behalf, he said, opening the folder to reveal what looked like job listings and salary information. Davidson & Associates isn't the only opportunity available to someone with your qualifications. He spread several printed pages across the table, like evidence in a trial. Hartwell Corporation is looking for a junior financial analyst. Starting salary, $52,000. Meridian Consulting needs an operations coordinator, $48,000 plus benefits. Sterling & Associates has an opening for a project manager trainee, $45,000 with clear advancement potential. Each salary figure hit like a physical blow, not because the money wasn't appealing, but because of what it represented. Their absolute certainty that my worth could be measured in annual income. We've also calculated your current earnings, Aunt Diane added, pulling out what appeared to be a detailed spreadsheet. Based on minimum wage plus estimated tips, accounting for the fact that you don't work full-time hours during slow seasons, your annual income is approximately $23,000. The precision of their research was both impressive and horrifying. They'd dissected my financial life with the thoroughness of forensic accountants. 23,000, my father repeated, letting the number hang in the air like an indictment. Maya, that's barely above the federal poverty line for a single person. You're living paycheck to paycheck, one emergency away from financial disaster. Trevor leaned forward, his expression mixing concern with condescension. We're worried about your future, Maya. What happens when you get sick? What happens if the cafe goes out of business? What happens when you're too old to stand on your feet all day? These were the questions that haunted my quiet moments, the fears I'd pushed down because I couldn't bear to examine them too closely. Hearing them voiced aloud, in front of my entire family, felt like having my deepest insecurities dragged into harsh light. You have no retirement savings, Brittany added gently, her voice full of the kind of pity reserved for the truly unfortunate. No health insurance beyond the basic plan. No investments, no property, no real assets to speak of. Wellington, bless him, looked uncomfortable with the financial dissection of my life, but he didn't speak up to defend me. His silence felt almost worse than active participation. Which brings us to our proposition, my mother said, her voice taking on the tone she'd used when I was a child, and she was explaining why certain choices had consequences. We're prepared to help you transition into a real career, but we need a commitment from you. A commitment. The word carried weight, finality, the sense of signing a contract that couldn't be broken. My father pulled out another document, this one official-looking, with letterhead and everything. We've spoken with Richard Davidson personally. He's agreed to hold the accounting position until the end of this month. The salary is $45,000 to start, with guaranteed raises based on performance. Full benefits, paid vacation, 401k matching. But, Uncle Gerald added, his voice growing stern, this is contingent on you giving your 2 weeks' notice at the coffee shop immediately after the Pinnacle Industries gala. No delays, no second-guessing, no changing your mind. The timeline felt deliberately cruel. Enjoy one last evening, pretending your current life matters, then abandon it forever. We'll also help with the transition, my mother continued. New professional wardrobe, security deposit for a better apartment, even a down payment on a reliable car. Consider it an investment in your future. The offer was generous, practical, designed to remove every possible obstacle to accepting their vision of my life. It would solve my financial insecurity, provide stability, give me the kind of respectable career that would make them proud. So why did it feel like they were asking me to attend my own funeral? What if I say no? I asked quietly, though I already suspected I knew the answer. The silence that followed was deafening. Glances were exchanged around the table, the kind of meaningful looks that suggested this possibility had been discussed and prepared for. Then we have to conclude that you're not the daughter we raised, my father said finally, his voice heavy with disappointment. The Maya we know is smart, ambitious, capable of great things. This version of you, the one content to waste her potential on a dead-end job, isn't someone we recognize. The words hit like a physical blow. They weren't just rejecting my choices, they were rejecting me. We can't continue to pretend this is healthy, Aunt Diane added. We can't keep supporting decisions that are clearly self-destructive. Sometimes loving someone means refusing to enable their worst impulses. Supporting decisions? I repeated, my voice getting stronger despite the devastation. What support? You've spent 3 years telling me I'm a failure. You've embarrassed me in public, undermined my confidence, and dismissed everything I've accomplished. Because we refuse to pretend that serving coffee is an accomplishment, Uncle Gerald exploded, his composure finally cracking. Because we love you too much to watch you throw your life away on some romantic fantasy about finding fulfillment in menial labor. It's not menial, I started to protest. It is, my mother interrupted, tears starting to flow. Maya, sweetheart, it is. And deep down you know it. You know you're capable of more. You know you're settling for less than you deserve. The accusation of settling cut deep because it voiced my own secret fears. Was I settling? Was I hiding behind the comfortable predictability of my coffee shop world because I was afraid of the challenges and expectations of corporate life? This isn't about money, my father said, his voice gentling slightly. It's about respect, self-respect, and the respect of others. When people ask what our daughter does for a living, we want to be proud of the answer. There it was, the core of their objection. My life choices embarrassed them. My happiness mattered less than their social standing. My fulfillment less than their ability to brag about my career at dinner parties. You have until Thursday, Trevor announced, consulting his phone calendar. The gala is Saturday night. If you haven't given notice by Thursday, we'll know where you stand. And if I don't? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. The look my parents exchanged was answer enough, but my mother voiced it anyway. Then we'll have to accept that we've lost our daughter to someone we don't recognize. Someone who values comfort over growth, mediocrity over excellence. Someone who's chosen strangers over family, my father added quietly. The ultimatum was complete. Choose their version of success, or lose them forever. As I drove home that night, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I tried to imagine walking into Moonbeam Cafe on Thursday morning and giving notice. I tried to picture telling Mrs. Holloway that I wouldn't be there to make her morning latte anymore, informing James that someone else would handle his double-shot Americano, explaining to Sarah that our daily conversations were ending because my family had convinced me that her problems weren't worth my time. The thought made me physically ill. But the alternative, losing my family forever, being disowned for choosing happiness over prestige, felt equally devastating. For the first time in 3 years, I seriously considered that maybe they were right. Maybe I was deluding myself about the value of my work. Maybe I was a college graduate playing dress-up in a world that didn't matter. Maybe it was time to grow up and join the real world, even if it meant killing the part of myself that had finally learned how to be happy. The 3 days between my family's ultimatum and the Pinnacle Industries gala were the darkest of my adult life. I'd barely slept, barely eaten, and spent most of my time at the cafe going through the motions while my mind churned through the impossible choice I'd been given. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly as I unlocked the cafe doors at 6 a.m. The familiar ritual of starting the espresso machine, arranging pastries in the display case, and flipping on the string lights felt different now. Possibly finite, like I was saying goodbye to each small task that had once brought me comfort. Mrs. Holloway arrived at exactly 6:15, as she had every morning for 3 years, Buster padding along beside her on his worn leather leash. But instead of her usual cheerful greeting, she took one look at my face and frowned with concern. Maya, honey, you look like you haven't slept in a week, she said, settling onto her favorite stool at the counter while Buster curled up at her feet. What's wrong? I tried to force my usual smile as I began preparing her decaf vanilla latte. Just tired, Mrs. Holloway. Nothing to worry about. But Mrs. Holloway had raised 4 children and buried a husband. She could spot emotional distress from across the room. Nonsense, she said firmly. I've been coming here long enough to know when something's eating at you. Talk to me. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or the weight of carrying this burden alone, or simply the genuine kindness in her voice, but something in me cracked. Before I could stop myself, the whole story came pouring out. My family's disappointment, the job ultimatum, the Thursday deadline, the certainty that I was about to lose either my work or my family forever. Mrs. Holloway listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making soft sounds of understanding. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, studying me with the kind of intensity that made me feel seen in a way my own family never managed. Maya, she said finally, let me tell you something about worth. I taught elementary school for 42 years. 42 years of shaping young minds, helping children learn to read and write and think for themselves. According to your family's logic, I was a failure too. Teacher salaries have never been impressive, and I certainly never climbed any corporate ladders. She took a sip of her latte, savoring it in that deliberate way she always did. But do you know what I remember from those 4 decades? I remember Tommy Peterson, who couldn't read when he started first grade and went on to become a librarian. I remember Sarah Chen, who was so shy she wouldn't speak in class until I gave her the confidence to find her voice. I remember hundreds of children who are now doctors and mechanics and artists and yes, even coffee shop owners. All because someone took the time to nurture their potential. Her eyes grew bright with unshed tears. Value isn't measured in salary figures, honey. It's measured in lives touched, in moments of connection, in the daily choice to make the world a little bit warmer and kinder than you found it. Before I could respond, the bell above the door chimed and James walked in, stamping rain from his boots. He took one look at my tear-streaked face and Mrs. Holloway's protective posture and immediately understood something serious was happening. Everything okay? He asked, approaching the counter with the careful concern of someone who'd learned to read people's moods during 20 years of delivering mail. Mrs. Holloway gestured for him to sit. Maya's family is trying to force her to quit the cafe and take some corporate job. They've given her until Thursday to decide. James's face darkened with an anger I'd never seen from the gentle postal worker. They want you to quit? Are they insane?
I started to explain about the ultimatum, the job offers, my family's certainty that I was wasting my life. But James cut me off with a sharp wave of his hand. Maya, let me tell you what you mean to this community, he said, his voice intense with conviction. Do you remember last winter when Mrs. Patterson fell on the ice outside the post office? You saw it happen from the cafe window, ran out in the snow without a coat, and stayed with her until the ambulance came. Then you brought her hot soup every day for a week while she recovered. I'd forgotten about that incident, but James clearly hadn't. Or what about when the Henderson family lost their house in that fire last spring? You organized the whole neighborhood donation drive from right here in the cafe. Collected clothes, furniture, even started a fund that raised over $5,000. You turned this place into a community center for people who were hurting. More customers had begun filtering in during James's speech. Sarah with the twins, Mr. Chen from the flower shop next door, Dr. Whitman, who stopped by before his hospital rounds. Without planning it, we'd attracted an audience for what was becoming an impromptu testimonial. And you, James continued, pointing at Sarah, tell her what Maya did when Lucas was in the hospital. Sarah shifted her daughter to her other hip, her eyes filling with tears at the memory. When Lucas had pneumonia last year and was in the children's ward for a week, Maya showed up every morning with coffee for me and Tyler and hot chocolate for Lucas when he was feeling better. She never made it a big deal, never acted like it was anything special. She just saw that we needed help and provided it. She also coordinated the meal train, Dr. Whitman added quietly. Half the neighborhood was bringing us dinner because Maya organized it all from here. We never had to worry about feeding Tyler while we were focused on Lucas getting better. I stared at them, overwhelmed by this catalog of moments I'd barely thought about. To me, these hadn't been grand gestures. They'd been natural responses to neighbors in need, small kindnesses that required no special recognition. "That's what your family doesn't understand," Mrs. Holloway said, reaching across the counter to squeeze my hand. "They're so focused on traditional success markers that they can't see the actual impact you're having. They can't see that you've become the heart of this community." Mr. Chen, who'd been listening quietly, stepped forward with his own contribution. "My flower shop was failing when you started working here," he said in his careful English. "Nobody walked down this block anymore, but you brought life back to this corner. People come for coffee and discover my flowers, the bookstore, the antique shop. You saved all our businesses just by caring about your customers." The weight of their words was almost overwhelming. These people, my customers, my neighbors, my friends, saw value in my work that my own family couldn't recognize. They understood that building community, creating connection, and providing daily comfort were forms of success that couldn't be measured in salary figures. "The corporate world has plenty of accountants and analysts," Dr. Whitman said thoughtfully, "but how many people have the gift for making others feel seen and valued? How many people can turn a simple coffee transaction into a moment of human connection?" "Your family is asking you to give up a calling for a career," James added. "And there's a difference. A career is what you do to pay bills. A calling is what you do to feed your soul and serve others." As if summoned by the conversation, more regular customers had gathered. The elderly couple who shared a scone every Thursday, the college student who studied for her nursing exams at the corner table, the construction worker who stopped by every morning before his shift. Without realizing it, we'd created an impromptu support group right there in the cafe. "We need you here," the nursing student said simply. "Not just for the coffee, but for this." She gestured around the room. "For the sense that someone cares, that we matter as individuals rather than just customers." "You remember everyone's names," the construction worker added. "Their kids' names, their problems, their celebrations. Do you know how rare that is? How much that means to people who spend most of their day feeling invisible?"
The elderly woman, Mrs. Foster, spoke up in her wavering voice. "After Harold died, this was the only place I felt comfortable leaving the house. Maya made me feel welcome, like I belonged somewhere. Without that..." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. Standing there, surrounded by these people who had become so much more than customers, I felt something shift inside me. My family saw my work as serving coffee to strangers. But these weren't strangers. They were a community I'd helped build, relationships I'd nurtured, lives I'd touched in small but meaningful ways. "Your family thinks you're wasting your business degree," Mrs. Holloway said with a knowing smile. "But what do they think community building is? What do they think customer relations and operations management and creating loyalty programs are? You're using every skill from that degree, just not in the way they expected." For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of my old confidence returning. These people weren't just being kind. They were showing me a truth my family's disappointment had obscured. I wasn't failing at life. I was succeeding at something they didn't value. But even as their support warmed something frozen inside me, I knew the battle wasn't over. Tomorrow was Thursday. Tomorrow I would have to make a choice that would define the rest of my life. The question was, would I choose the approval of people who couldn't see my worth, or the authentic happiness I'd found among people who did? Thursday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, both in the weather and in my mind. The support I'd received from my customers the day before had worked like a slow-acting medicine, gradually neutralizing the poison of my family's disapproval. As I walked to work through streets still damp from the previous day's rain, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: certainty. The cafe felt different that morning, charged with the energy of a decision finally made. As I went through my opening routine, each familiar task felt like a small act of rebellion, a quiet declaration that this work mattered, that this life I'd built was worth defending. My phone had been buzzing since 7 a.m. with messages from my family, each one a variation on the same theme. Don't forget about the deadline. We're counting on you to make the right choice. David Davidson called to confirm you're still interested in the position. I'd read them all but hadn't responded, savoring the first silence I'd maintained in our ongoing battle. At 9:30 a.m., exactly when I'd told them I would, I called Davidson and Associates. "Good morning, this is Maya Rodriguez," I said when the receptionist connected me to Richard Davidson's assistant. "I'm calling about the accounting position that was being held for me." "Oh yes, Ms. Rodriguez," the assistant said warmly. "Mr. Davidson has been expecting your call. Should I put you through to discuss start date details?" This was the moment. The point of no return. I could still change course. Still choose the path my family had laid out for me. Still become the daughter they wanted me to be. "Actually," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word, "I'm calling to formally decline the position. I won't be accepting the offer." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "I'm sorry," the assistant finally said, clearly confused. "Did you say you're declining?" "Mr. Davidson was under the impression that your family had confirmed your interest." "My family doesn't speak for me," I replied, and the truth of that statement felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Please give Mr. Davidson my thanks for considering me, but I'm not interested in leaving my current position." After I hung up, I sat in the back office for several minutes, letting the magnitude of what I had just done sink in. I had crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back now. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of routine tasks made extraordinary by my newfound sense of purpose. Every customer interaction felt sharper, more meaningful. When Mrs. Holloway came in for her afternoon tea, she took one look at my face and smiled. "You made your choice," she said. "It wasn't a question." "I did," I confirmed, unable to keep the relief out of my voice. "Good girl," she said, patting my hand. "Now comes the hard part." She was right, of course. At 2:47 p.m., my phone rang with my mother's ringtone. "Maya, sweetheart," she said without preamble, "Richard Davidson just called your father. He said you declined the position. There must be some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Mom," I said, stepping into the back office for privacy. "I'm not taking the job." The silence that followed was different from the assistant's confusion. This was the silence of shock mixed with disbelief. "What do you mean you're not taking it?" Her voice had gone up an octave. "Maya, we had an agreement. You promised to think about it seriously." "I did think about it seriously," I replied, and my answer is no. "But the deadline." "The deadline was arbitrary and manipulative," I interrupted, surprising myself with my directness. "You don't get to set ultimatums about my life, Mom. You don't get to force me to choose between your approval and my happiness." "Your happiness?" she repeated, her voice rising to near hysteria. "Maya, what happiness? You're living in poverty. You're wasting your education. You're throwing away every opportunity we've given you." "I'm living the life I chose," I said firmly. "I'm doing work that matters to me, in a community that values what I contribute. That's not poverty, that's purpose." "Purpose?" The word came out like a curse. "Maya, making coffee is not a purpose. It's a placeholder for people who are afraid to commit to real goals." The old accusation still stung, but it no longer had the power to demolish my confidence. "It's real to me, Mom. It's real to my customers who depend on this place. It's real to the community I've helped build." "Community?" Her laugh was sharp and bitter. "Maya, those people aren't your community. They're customers who'll forget you exist the moment you're not useful to them anymore." The cruelty of that statement, the dismissal of relationships I'd spent 3 years building, crystallized something in my mind. This wasn't about my career, or my potential, or my financial security. This was about control, about their inability to accept that I might know what was best for my own life. "I need to go," I said. "We have customers." "Don't you dare hang up on me," she snapped. "We're not finished discussing this." "Yes, we are," I replied, and for the first time in my adult life, I hung up on my mother. The phone immediately started ringing again. I turned it off. The afternoon flew by in a strange mixture of exhilaration and dread. I'd finally done it. Finally stood up to my family's pressure and chosen my own path. But I knew the victory was temporary. The real confrontation was still coming. At 4 p.m., Uncle Gerald walked through the cafe doors. He didn't get in line or browse the menu board. He walked straight to the counter with the purposeful stride of a man on a mission, his face set in the kind of grim determination usually reserved for funeral directors. "Maya," he said without preamble, "we need to talk." "I'm working," I replied, not looking up from the espresso machine where I was cleaning the portafilters. "This is more important than coffee," he said, his voice carrying the authority he'd always used to command attention at family gatherings. I looked up then, meeting his eyes directly. "Nothing is more important than the work I'm doing right now." His face flushed red. "Maya, stop this nonsense. Your mother is beside herself. Your father is ready to disown you. Do you understand what you're throwing away?" "I understand exactly what I'm choosing," I said, my voice calm, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I'm choosing myself." "You're choosing failure," he exploded, loud enough to make other customers turn and stare. "You're choosing to waste every advantage you've been given, every sacrifice your family has made for you." James, who'd been reading his newspaper at a corner table, stood up and moved closer to the counter. Mrs. Foster, enjoying her afternoon tea and cookies, watched with the sharp interest of someone who'd witnessed enough family dramas to recognize the important moments. "I'm choosing work that brings me joy," I said, my voice getting stronger as I realized I had witnesses to this confrontation. People who understood the value of what I did. "I'm choosing a life that aligns with my values instead of your expectations." "Your values?" Gerald's voice dripped with scorn. "What values? Mediocrity? Underachievement? Settling for less than you deserve?" "Kindness," I said firmly. "Community, service, making people's daily lives a little bit better. Those are my values, Uncle Gerald, and they're worth more to me than any salary you could offer." "Those aren't values. They're excuses for people too scared to compete in the real world." That's when James stepped forward, his postman's uniform lending him an unexpected authority. "Excuse me," he said politely but firmly, "but you're disrupting other customers. Maybe you should continue this conversation somewhere else." Gerald whirled around, clearly outraged that a stranger would dare intervene. "This is a family matter. It doesn't concern you." "Actually," Mrs. Foster said in her clear, elderly voice, "it concerns all of us. Maya is part of our community. We have a stake in her well-being." "Community?" Gerald repeated, his voice incredulous. "She's a coffee shop employee. You people barely know her." "We know her better than you do," James said quietly, and the simple truth of that statement hung in the air like a bell that couldn't be unrung. The words hit Gerald like a physical blow. He stared at James, then at Mrs. Foster, then at the other customers who had stopped their conversations to listen to this exchange. For the first time, he seemed to realize that he was the outsider here, that these people saw something in me that he couldn't. "Maya," he said, turning back to me with what might have been his last attempt at reason, "think about your future. Think about what you want your life to look like in 10 years, 20 years. Do you really want to be standing behind this counter when you're 40, when you're 50? The question was designed to terrify me, to force me to confront the fears about aging and irrelevance that kept many people trapped in careers they hated. But something had shifted in me during this confrontation. I was no longer afraid of their vision of my future because I'd finally seen it clearly. It wasn't a future I wanted. If I'm still making people's days better, if I'm still building community, if I'm still doing work that matters to me, then yes, I said. I'd be proud to stand behind this counter at 50. The certainty in my voice seemed to deflate him. "You're making a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life," he said, but the fight had gone out of him. "Maybe," I acknowledged. "But it will be my mistake to make." After he left, the cafe felt lighter, as if his disapproval had been a weight pressing down on all of us. James returned to his newspaper with a satisfied nod. Mrs. Foster raised her teacup in a small salute. The college student at the corner table looked up from her textbook long enough to give me a thumbs up. I'd done it. I'd finally stood up to my family's pressure and chosen my own path. But even as I savored the victory, I knew the war wasn't over. Tomorrow night was the Pinnacle Industries gala, and I had no doubt my family would use that public stage for one final attempt to break my resolve. What I didn't know was that the universe was about to provide me with the most spectacular vindication imaginable, delivered by a man whose connection to my small coffee shop would redefine everything my family thought they knew about success. The 24 hours between my confrontation with Uncle Gerald and the Pinnacle Industries gala became a masterclass in psychological warfare. My family, stunned by my defiance, regrouped and launched their most devastating campaign yet, one designed not just to change my mind, but to completely destroy my confidence in the choice I'd made. It started Friday morning at 6 a.m., when I arrived at the cafe to find my father's truck parked directly in front of the entrance. He was sitting on the hood, arms crossed, wearing the same expression he'd worn when I was 16, and had missed my curfew by 3 hours. "We need to talk," he said without preamble as I approached with my keys. "I'm opening the cafe," I replied, trying to step around him to reach the door. "The cafe can wait," he said, not moving. "Your future can't." There was something different about his demeanor, a controlled desperation that was more unsettling than Uncle Gerald's explosive anger. This was my father in crisis management mode, the same focused intensity he brought to his work as a mechanical engineer when a critical system was failing. "Dad, I've made my decision," I said, but my voice lacked the confidence I'd felt the day before. Something about facing him alone, without the support of my cafe community, made me feel 16 again. "No," he said firmly, "you've made an emotional reaction. There's a difference. Now we're going to discuss this rationally, like adults." He pulled out his phone and showed me a document I recognized. My college transcript, somehow obtained and printed out. "Summa cum laude," he read aloud. "Dean's List every semester. Academic Excellence Award. Outstanding Achievement in Business Analytics." Each accolade felt like an indictment rather than a celebration. "Your professors didn't give you these honors so you could serve coffee, Maya. They recognized exceptional potential that you're now deliberately wasting." "I'm not wasting anything," I protested, but the words felt weak even to me. "You are," he continued relentlessly. "Do you know what Dr. Hendricks from your strategic management class said when I called him yesterday?" My stomach dropped. "You called my professor?" "He said you were one of the most promising business students he'd taught in 20 years. He said you had the analytical mind and leadership qualities to run major operations. He was shocked, Maya, to learn that you're working in food service." The betrayal of having my father contact my former professors felt like a violation, but worse was the weight of their disappointed expectations. These were people who had believed in me, who had seen potential I was apparently squandering. "He offered to make some calls," Dad continued. "Corporate contacts, MBA program connections. He's willing to help you get back on track, but only if you move quickly. Opportunities like this don't wait for people having quarter-life crises." Quarter-life crisis. The clinical term made my choices sound like a temporary mental breakdown rather than a deliberate life decision. "I'm not having a crisis," I said, but doubt was creeping in like cold water through a crack in a dam. "Maya," his voice softened, taking on the tone he'd used when I was small and needed comfort. "I know you think you're happy. I know this little coffee shop feels safe and comfortable. But happiness built on mediocrity doesn't last. Eventually, you'll wake up at 45 and realize you've wasted the best years of your life on something that doesn't matter." The image he painted, myself as a middle-aged woman filled with regret, surrounded by the ruins of squandered potential, hit me with unexpected force. Was that my future? Was I deluding myself about the sustainability of my happiness? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. Important information about your quote-quote community impact." A concerned family member. With trembling fingers, I opened my email to find a message from Trevor with the subject line, "Reality check, Maya's real impact." The email contained screenshots of online reviews for Moonbeam Cafe, but not the positive ones I was used to seeing. These were different, recent reviews I'd never seen before, all posted in the last 24 hours. "Overpriced coffee and pretentious atmosphere. The staff acts like they're doing you a favor by taking your order. 1 star. Slow service and mediocre drinks. There are better coffee shops downtown that don't act like they're running a community center instead of a business. 2 stars. The barista is nice enough but seems more interested in chatting than actually making coffee. If you want efficiency, go somewhere else. 2 stars. Each review felt like a punch to the stomach. Were these real customers? Had I been so wrong about the impact I was having? The reviews were devastating precisely because they contained enough truth to be believable. I did prioritize conversation over speed. I did treat the cafe more like a community center than a pure business. "Where did you get these?" I asked my father, my voice barely above a whisper. "Trevor thought you should see how your customers really feel when they think you're not watching," he replied. "Maya, you've been living in a bubble. These people aren't your friends. They're customers who are too polite to tell you the truth to your face." The doubt that had been a trickle became a flood. Had I misread every interaction? Were Mrs. Holloway's morning visits motivated by politeness rather than genuine affection? Was James's support yesterday just the kindness of someone who felt sorry for me? "Even if some of this is true," I said, grasping for stability, "it doesn't change the fact that I love my work." "Love?" My father's voice turned sharp. "Maya, you love the fantasy of your work. You love the story you've told yourself about being some kind of community pillar. But look at the evidence. Look at what people really think when they're being honest." He pulled out another document, a printed spreadsheet that looked like a financial analysis. I also did some research on Moonbeam Cafe's business prospects. Do you know the average lifespan of independent coffee shops in downtown areas? 18 months. Do you know how many survive past 5 years? Less than 30%. The numbers hit like physical blows. I'd never looked at the cafe's long-term viability from this analytical perspective, never considered that my entire life's foundation might be built on sand. "The owner, Mrs. Ramirez, is 68 years old," he continued. "Her children live in different states and have no interest in the business. What do you think happens when she retires, when she can't afford the rent increases that are coming to this neighborhood, when the building gets sold to developers?" These were questions I'd avoided thinking about, fears I'd pushed down because they threatened the security I'd found in my small world. "You're not just wasting your own potential, Maya. You're building your entire life around something that's temporary at best, doomed at worst. And when it all falls apart, and it will, you'll be 35 years old with no relevant experience, no professional network, and no prospects." The precision of his attack was surgical. Every fear I'd harbored, every doubt I'd suppressed, every worst-case scenario I'd refused to contemplate, he laid them all out with the methodical thoroughness of an engineer diagnosing system failures. "The Davidson job is still available until Monday," he said, checking his watch. "But after that, the opportunity is gone forever. Other candidates are being interviewed. Mr. Davidson won't wait indefinitely for someone who can't make up her mind." Monday. 3 days away. The timeline felt both impossibly short and terrifyingly final. "Think about tonight," he continued. "Think about being at that gala, surrounded by successful people who've made something of themselves. Think about having to explain that you chose to serve coffee instead of building a real career. Think about the pity in their eyes when they realize what you've done with your advantages." The image he painted of the evening ahead filled me with dread. I'd been nervous about the gala before, but now it felt like walking into a courtroom where I'd already been found guilty of wasting my life. "I need to open the cafe," I said weakly. "Maya," his voice was gentle now, almost pleading, "I'm trying to save you from a life of regret. We all are. Don't let stubbornness destroy your future." As he drove away, I stood on the sidewalk with my keys in my hand, paralyzed by the weight of doubt he'd loaded onto my shoulders. The cafe keys felt heavier somehow, like I was carrying the tools of my own destruction rather than my daily purpose. Inside, as I went through the opening routine, everything felt different. When Mrs. Holloway arrived for her morning latte, I found myself scrutinizing her smile for signs of politeness masking pity. When James made friendly conversation, I wondered if he was just being kind to someone he saw as pathetic. The reviews Trevor had sent kept echoing in my mind. Was I really providing value, or was I just indulging in a fantasy of importance while annoying customers who were too polite to complain directly? By lunchtime, my confidence was in ruins. The support I'd felt from my community the day before seemed like a mirage, possibly motivated by sympathy rather than genuine appreciation. The work I'd found meaningful felt suddenly small and insignificant. My phone buzzed with another message from my mother. "Sweetheart, your father told me about your conversation. It's not too late to fix this. Call Mr. Davidson." Choose your future over your fears. We love you too much to watch you destroy yourself. Tonight at the gala, let's celebrate your decision to finally grow up. Grow up. The phrase cut deep because it voiced my own secret fear, that my happiness in the cafe was just an elaborate form of playing house, that I'd never actually become the adult my education and opportunities should have produced. As evening approached and I prepared to close the cafe, I felt more lost and confused than I had since this whole ordeal began. My family's systematic destruction of my confidence had worked. They'd taken my moment of clarity and buried it under an avalanche of doubt, fear, and shame. Walking home to get ready for the gala, I wondered if they were right. Maybe I was just a scared little girl hiding behind the comfortable predictability of my coffee shop world. Maybe it was time to face reality and choose the life they'd mapped out for me. What I didn't know was that the universe was about to provide the most spectacular answer to all my doubts, delivered by a man whose presence at that gala would rewrite everything I thought I knew about success, value, and the true meaning of a life well lived. Standing in front of my bathroom mirror at 6 p.m., wrestling with the zipper of a black dress I'd bought on clearance 2 years ago, I felt like I was preparing for my own execution rather than a gala. The woman staring back at me looked hollow, defeated, nothing like the confident person who had stood up to Uncle Gerald just 2 days earlier. My family's systematic destruction of my confidence had worked. Every foundation of my self-worth had been systematically demolished. The positive reviews I'd cherished now seemed naive compared to the brutal honesty Trevor had shown me. The customer relationships I'd treasured felt shallow and possibly one-sided. The meaningful work I'd found at the cafe appeared to be nothing more than an elaborate delusion. As I applied makeup with trembling hands, my phone buzzed with a final message from my mother. "We'll meet you at the hotel." Dad spoke to Mr. Davidson again today. He's willing to extend the deadline until Tuesday if you commit tonight. This is your last chance, sweetheart. Don't let pride destroy your future. We love you. They kept using that word like a weapon, as if their disappointment was just another form of affection, as if destroying my confidence was an act of caring. The Ravensbrook Grand Hotel loomed against the evening sky like a castle from a fairy tale, its windows glowing gold in the twilight. Luxury cars lined the circular drive as Ravensbrook's elite arrived for the annual Pinnacle Industries gala. I sat in my ancient Honda Civic for several minutes, watching women in designer gowns and men in perfectly tailored tuxedos glide through the marble entrance like they belonged to a different species. What was I doing here? I was a coffee shop worker pretending to fit into a world that would see through my discount dress and drugstore makeup in seconds. My family was right. I didn't belong among these successful people. I was an imposter about to be exposed. The hotel lobby was a symphony of marble and crystal, with flower arrangements that probably cost more than I made in a month. I found my family's table number and made my way through the crowd, acutely aware of how out of place I felt among the silk and diamonds surrounding me. My family was already seated at table 7, looking elegant and comfortable in their formal wear. My mother wore a navy blue gown that had probably cost more than my rent, while my father looked distinguished in his black tuxedo. Uncle Gerald and Aunt Diane flanked them, with Trevor and Brittany completing the circle of my judgment panel. "Maya," my mother exclaimed, standing to embrace me. "You look lovely, sweetheart." The compliment felt hollow, delivered with the same tone one might use to praise a child's finger painting. I could see the assessment in her eyes. The catalog of my cheap dress, my amateur makeup, my general inadequacy compared to the polished perfection surrounding us. "This is quite an event," I said, settling into my assigned chair and trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "Indeed it is," Uncle Gerald said meaningfully. "Look around, Maya. This is what success looks like. These are the people who matter in Ravensbrook, the ones who actually influence policy and drive economic development." As if on cue, a woman at the neighboring table laughed, a sophisticated sound that seemed to highlight how out of my depth I was. She wore a red gown that probably cost more than my car, and her jewelry caught the light like captured starfire. "That's Dr. Charlotte Vance," Aunt Diane whispered. "She's the chief medical officer at Ravensbrook General. Started as a resident 15 years ago and worked her way to the top. That's what ambition looks like." The comparison was subtle but clear. Dr. Vance had used her education to climb to the pinnacle of her field. while I had used mine to pour coffee for people who would never remember my name. "And over there," Trevor added, nodding toward a distinguished man in a charcoal suit, "that's Robert Blackstone. He owns half the commercial real estate downtown, started with one small building and built an empire." Every person they pointed out was another example of what I wasn't: successful, influential, important. With each comparison, I felt myself shrinking further into my chair, my borrowed confidence evaporating like morning mist. The evening's program began with cocktails and networking, an exercise that felt like social torture. My family moved through the crowd with practiced ease, making connections and discussing business deals, investments, and career achievements. I trailed behind them like an embarrassed teenager, having nothing to contribute to conversations about market trends and corporate strategies. When people asked what I did for a living, my family's responses became increasingly creative in their evasiveness. "Maya is exploring her options," my mother would say. Or "she's taking some time to decide on her career path." The shame of these deflections was almost unbearable. During dinner, as speeches were made about Pinnacle Industries' contributions to the community and economy, I felt my last reserves of resistance crumbling. These people spoke in terms of millions of dollars, thousands of jobs created, major infrastructure projects that shaped the city's future. What did I have to offer by comparison? Perfect foam art and remembered coffee orders? "The speakers tonight have been quite inspiring," my father said during a lull in the program. It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? The scale of what's possible when people apply themselves to meaningful work. Meaningful work. The phrase was a dagger, aimed directly at my heart. "Maya," my mother leaned over, her voice gentle but insistent. "I spoke to Mrs. Davidson earlier. She mentioned that their accounting department is expanding rapidly. There would be opportunities for advancement, maybe even management roles, within a few years." Management roles. The carrot they kept dangling, the promise of climbing a ladder that led to respectability and family approval. "Think about it," Trevor added, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd successfully navigated the corporate world. "In 5 years, you could be sitting at a table like this as a respected professional instead of—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We all knew what came after "instead of." As the evening wore on, I felt my resolve dissolving completely. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had been living in a fantasy, pretending that my small contributions mattered in a world where success was measured in revenue and influence. Maybe it was time to grow up and accept the life they'd mapped out for me. The final speaker of the evening was Alexander Thornton himself, CEO of Pinnacle Industries. I watched him approach the podium with the commanding presence of someone who'd built an empire through vision and determination. Here was a man who'd started with nothing and created something that employed thousands of people, generated millions in revenue, and shaped the economic landscape of our entire region. This was what real success looked like. This was what I could never achieve serving coffee in a small cafe that might not even exist in 5 years. As Mr. Thornton began his speech about community investment and corporate responsibility, I made my decision. When we got back to the table, I would tell my family they were right. I would call Mr. Davidson on Monday morning and accept the position. I would give my notice at the cafe and begin the process of becoming the daughter they wanted me to be. It would hurt, saying goodbye to Mrs. Holloway and James and all the customers who'd become part of my daily life. It would feel like betraying something precious and irreplaceable. But maybe that was just the cost of growing up, of facing reality instead of hiding behind comfortable illusions. The speech was winding down when Mr. Thornton said something that made my blood freeze in my veins. "Before I close tonight, I want to share a personal story about the kind of community investment that really matters. 3 years ago, I was going through the darkest period of my life. My wife Elizabeth had just been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. I was spending every spare moment at doctor's appointments, researching treatments, trying to find hope in a situation that felt hopeless. The ballroom had gone completely silent. This powerful man was sharing something deeply personal, and everyone could feel the weight of his vulnerability. During that time, there was a small coffee shop where I would stop every morning before visiting Elizabeth at the memory care facility. I was usually running late, stressed beyond measure, carrying the weight of watching the woman I loved disappear piece by piece. My heart began to pound as a impossible possibility began forming in my mind. But there was a young woman who worked there, Maya Rodriguez, who somehow made those horrible mornings bearable. She never asked questions about why I looked devastated. She never offered empty platitudes about everything working out. She just made my coffee exactly right every single time and treated me like a human being instead of a customer. The words hit me like lightning. The room spun around me as 3 years of memories came flooding back. The quiet man in the expensive suit who came in every morning for exactly 8 months, always ordering the same thing. Large black coffee, no sugar, extra hot. He'd always seemed sad, distracted, carrying some invisible weight. I'd made sure his coffee was perfect because he looked like someone who needed at least one thing in his day to go right. Maya never knew who I was, Mr. Thornton continued, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. She had no idea she was serving the CEO of Pinnacle Industries. To her, I was just another customer who needed kindness more than efficiency. And that kindness, that simple human decency, got me through the worst year of my life. I couldn't breathe. The elegant ballroom felt like it was spinning around me as every person at table 7 turned to stare, their faces reflecting various stages of shock, disbelief, and dawning realization. That's the kind of community investment that builds real value, Mr. Thornton said, his voice growing stronger. Not grand gestures or corporate donations, but daily acts of human connection that remind us what really matters. Maya Rodriguez didn't know she was changing someone's life. She was just doing her job with grace, competence, and genuine care for others. The applause that followed felt like thunder, but all I could hear was the sound of my family's entire worldview crashing down around them. The man they'd dismissed as unimportant, the customer they'd written off as meaningless, the work they'd called worthless, all of it was being redefined in real time by the most powerful person in the room. And as Alexander Thornton finished his speech and began walking back to his table, I realized he was heading straight toward us, with the purposeful stride of someone who had something important to say. My family's moment of reckoning was about to begin. The silence at our table was deafening as Alexander Thornton approached, his silver hair catching the light from the crystal chandelier above. Every eye in the ballroom seemed to follow his movement, creating a path of hushed anticipation through the crowd. My family sat frozen like statues, their faces reflecting various stages of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror at the implications of what they'd just heard. My mother's champagne glass trembled in her hand, the crystal making tiny clinking sounds against her engagement ring. My father's face had gone ashen, the confident authority he'd wielded so effectively just hours earlier, evaporating like smoke. Uncle Gerald's mouth hung slightly open, while Aunt Diane clutched her purse as if it might anchor her to a reality that was rapidly shifting beneath her feet. Trevor was the first to recover his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Maya, you never told us you knew the CEO of Pinnacle Industries? I didn't know, I managed, my own voice sounding foreign to my ears. He was just a customer. Just a customer. The phrase that my family had used to dismiss every relationship I'd built at the cafe suddenly carried enormous weight. How many just customers had stories like this? How many lives had I touched without knowing it? How many moments of connection had I created that mattered more than any salary figure could measure? Alexander Thornton reached our table and extended his hand directly to me, his smile warm with genuine recognition. Maya Rodriguez, he said, his voice carrying the same authority that had commanded the entire ballroom just moments before. I was hoping I'd have a chance to speak with you tonight. The surreal nature of the moment. The CEO of Ravensbrook's largest corporation seeking me out at a table where I'd been made to feel like the family failure created a cognitive dissonance that left everyone speechless. Mr. Thornton, I stammered, standing to shake his hand, acutely aware that every person at nearby tables was watching this interaction with intense curiosity. I remember you. The large black coffee, extra hot, every morning for about 8 months. His smile widened, and I caught a glimpse of the grieving man I'd served all those mornings, the one who'd carried such profound sadness in his eyes. "You made the best coffee in the city," he said. "But more than that, you made those mornings bearable. I'm not sure I ever properly thanked you for that." My father cleared his throat, his training in corporate networking finally overriding his shock. "Mr. Thornton, I'm Robert Rodriguez, Maya's father. This is quite a surprise." Alexander turned his attention to my family for the first time, his expression shifting subtly as he took in their formal attire, their careful positioning, their obvious importance to themselves. When he spoke, his voice carried the polite courtesy of someone well-versed in social diplomacy, but there was something else underneath, a sharpness that suggested he was evaluating more than just making conversation. "A surprise?" he repeated, his eyebrows rising slightly. "That your daughter provided exceptional service and genuine human kindness to someone in need? I should think that would be exactly what you'd expect from someone you raised." The compliment landed like a challenge. My family had spent months telling me I was wasting my potential, disappointing them, failing to live up to their expectations. Now the most successful person in Ravensbrook was praising those same qualities they'd dismissed as worthless. "Well, yes, of course," my mother said quickly, her voice taking on the artificially bright tone she used when trying to recover from social missteps. "We're very proud of Maya's customer service skills, though we've been encouraging her to pursue opportunities more suited to her education and potential." The phrase hung in the air like a poorly chosen weapon. More suited to her education and potential. As if what I'd done for Alexander Thornton, providing comfort and consistency during his darkest period, was somehow beneath my capabilities, rather than a perfect expression of them. Alexander's expression grew noticeably cooler. "I see," he said, and something in his tone made my father shift uncomfortably in his chair. "And what opportunities would those be?" Uncle Gerald, apparently sensing an opportunity to salvage the situation, leaned forward with his most professional smile. "Maya has a business degree from Ravensbrook University, summa cum laude. We've arranged for her to interview with Davidson and Associates for an accounting position. Much better use of her skills than coffee service." The dismissal was subtle but clear, and I watched Alexander's reaction with fascination. His face remained professionally neutral, but his eyes, the same eyes that had carried such gratitude during those morning coffee exchanges, grew ice cold. "Coffee service," he repeated slowly as if testing the words. "You mean the work that literally sustained me through watching my wife disappear from Alzheimer's disease? The daily human connection that reminded me there was still kindness in the world when everything else felt hopeless?" The temperature at our table seemed to drop 10 degrees. My family exchanged panicked glances, realizing they'd walked into a minefield without knowing it. "Of course, we didn't mean to diminish," my mother began. "With respect, Mrs. Rodriguez," Alexander interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I think you meant exactly that. You've been telling your daughter that her work doesn't matter, that serving others is beneath her capabilities, that success is measured only in salary figures and job titles." Each word hit my family like a physical blow. Their carefully constructed argument about my wasted potential was being dismantled by someone whose authority they couldn't question. "Let me share something with you," Alexander continued, his voice growing more intense. "Maya's work at that coffee shop demonstrates every quality I look for in my executives. Customer service excellence. She remembered orders and preferences for hundreds of people. Operational reliability. She was there every morning, consistent and dependable. Emotional intelligence. She could read people's needs and respond appropriately. Crisis management. She handled difficult customers and complex orders under pressure." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over our stunned table. "But most importantly, she showed genuine care for human beings. In my world, in the corporate environment you're so eager for her to join, that quality is rarer than you might think." Maya turned a simple transaction into a moment of human connection. She saw someone who was hurting and responded with competence and kindness. That's not a skill set to be ashamed of. It's leadership material. Trevor, who had been silent through this devastating assessment, finally found his voice. "But surely you'd agree that someone with her education should be aiming higher than food service?" Alexander turned his full attention to Trevor, and my cousin visibly wilted under the scrutiny. Higher, he said. Young man, Maya was practicing advanced customer relationship management, analyzing consumer patterns, managing complex operations, and providing crisis intervention services. She was running what amounts to a small consulting practice, specializing in human behavior and satisfaction metrics. The only difference between her work and what my business development team does is that she was adding value to people's daily lives instead of just their investment portfolios. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the soft clink of silverware at neighboring tables, the distant sound of laughter from other conversations, the whisper of fabric as people shifted in their chairs. Furthermore, Alexander continued, I've been watching Moonbeam Cafe's performance metrics through our downtown development tracking systems. Customer retention rates, revenue growth, community engagement scores, all exceptionally strong. Maya has been contributing to exactly the kind of neighborhood revitalization that drives our economic development initiatives. My father, desperately trying to salvage something from this conversation, cleared his throat. We certainly appreciate Maya's work ethic. We just want her to reach her full potential.
Her full potential, Alexander repeated, and now his voice carried a note of barely controlled anger. You mean the potential to abandon work that clearly fulfills her, serves her community, and demonstrates remarkable professional competence, in favor of a corporate position that would remove her from direct human impact and place her in a cubicle pushing numbers around spreadsheets? The brutal accuracy of that description left my family speechless. Everything they'd presented as opportunity and advancement suddenly sounded like imprisonment and waste. With all due respect, Uncle Gerald said, his voice tight with the strain of maintaining politeness while his worldview crumbled, the accounting position offers better financial security and advancement opportunities. Alexander's laugh was sharp and humorless. Financial security? Gerald? May I call you Gerald? Nan Dash, your niece has been providing consistent value to her community for 3 years. She's built genuine relationships, developed real skills, and created measurable impact. That's the foundation of every successful business career I've ever seen. He turned back to me, his expression softening. Maya, I have a question for you, and I want an honest answer, not what you think anyone else wants to hear. Does your work at the cafe bring you satisfaction? Do you feel like you're making a meaningful contribution? The question hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. For the first time in months, someone with unquestionable authority was asking me what I wanted, what I valued, what brought me fulfillment. Yes, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. Yes, it does. I love what I do. I love the people I serve. I love being part of their daily lives, helping them start their days right, creating a space where people feel welcomed and valued. Then why, he asked, his voice gentle but carrying clearly to every person within earshot, would anyone who claims to love you want you to give that up? The question hung over our table like a sword of judgment. My family sat in stunned silence, unable to provide an answer that didn't expose their fundamental selfishness, their prioritization of social status over my happiness, their complete inability to see value in anything that didn't match their narrow definition of success. And in that silence, I finally understood that this moment wasn't just about vindication. It was about choice. The choice between living my authentic life and living their version of success. The choice between trusting my own judgment and deferring to their expectations. The choice between happiness and approval. For the first time in months, the choice was crystal clear. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Alexander Thornton spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had built an empire from nothing. Maya, he said, pulling out a business card from his jacket pocket, I'd like to discuss a proposition with you. Not tonight. This isn't the appropriate venue. But sometime this week. Would you be willing to meet with me at my office? I took the card with trembling fingers, the elegant cardstock feeling substantial and important. Of course, Mr. Thornton. I'd be honored. Excellent, he said, then turned his attention back to my family one final time. I hope you'll reconsider your perspective on your daughter's choices. In my experience, happiness and fulfillment are the foundations of all real success. Everything else is just window dressing." With that devastating final assessment, he nodded politely to the table and walked away, leaving my family sitting in the wreckage of their carefully constructed campaign against my life choices. The moment he was out of earshot, the table erupted into frantic whispers. "Maya, you never told us you knew him personally," my mother hissed, her voice tight with panic. "I didn't know," I repeated, still staring at the business card in my hands. "He was just a customer who seemed sad. I tried to make his mornings a little better." "Just a customer," my father said hollowly, the phrase clearly echoing in his mind with new meaning. "Maya, do you understand what just happened? The CEO of Pinnacle Industries just publicly validated your career choices in front of half of Ravensbrook's business community." Uncle Gerald was frantically scrolling through his phone. "People are already talking about this on social media," he said, his voice filled with a kind of desperate confusion. Someone recorded part of his speech. It's being shared with captions like, "CEO praises local barista," and "The power of kindness in business." For 3 years, my family had been mortified by my career choice, afraid of how it reflected on them at social gatherings and family events. Now that same choice was being celebrated by the most respected businessman in the city, and they didn't know how to process the cognitive dissonance.
And there it was, the fundamental misunderstanding that had driven this entire conflict. Even now, faced with overwhelming evidence that my work had value, they could only see it in terms of how it might be leveraged for something they considered more important. "It doesn't change anything," I said quietly, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I'm not going to use Mr. Thornton's gratitude to try to get a different job. I love the job I have." Trevor stared at me as if I'd announced my intention to move to Mars. "Maya, are you insane? You have a direct line to the most powerful person in the city. You could ask for anything. A position at Pinnacle Industries, recommendations to other major corporations, investment opportunities. And you want to keep making coffee?" "Yes," I said, the word coming out stronger than I'd expected. "Yes, I want to keep making coffee. I want to keep serving my community. I want to keep doing work that brings me joy and makes other people's lives a little bit better." My mother leaned forward, her voice taking on the urgent tone she'd always used when trying to save me from what she perceived as my own poor judgment. "Sweetheart, you can't be serious. After everything that just happened, after seeing how your work impressed Mr. Thornton, surely you understand that you could leverage this into something bigger." "Something bigger," I repeated, testing the phrase. "Mom, what if this is already big enough? What if touching one person's life during their darkest moment is exactly the right size of impact for me to make?" The concept seemed incomprehensible to them. In their worldview, success was always about scaling up, climbing higher, reaching for more. The idea that someone might find perfect satisfaction in the scope of influence they already had was foreign to everything they believed about ambition and achievement. "Maya," my father said, his voice carrying the patient tone he'd always used when explaining basic concepts to a child. "You're 28 years old. You can't build a future on one customer's gratitude, no matter how influential he is. You need to think practically about your long-term prospects." "I am thinking practically," I replied, feeling more clear-headed than I had in months. "I'm thinking about waking up every morning excited about my work. I'm thinking about building something meaningful in my community. I'm thinking about the fact that I already have a future, one that brings me happiness and serves others." Brittany, who had been silent through most of the evening's drama, finally spoke up. "Maya, I don't understand. Don't you want more for yourself? Don't you want to achieve something significant?" The question hit me with unexpected clarity. For months I'd been defending my choices against their attacks, but I'd never really articulated what I was choosing for, rather than just what I was choosing against. "I am achieving something significant," I said, my voice growing stronger with conviction. "Every morning, Mrs. Holloway comes in for her latte and tells me about her granddaughter's piano recitals. That relationship, the fact that she has someone who listens, who remembers, who cares about the details of her life, that's significant. James stops by for his coffee, and we talk about the books he's reading." For 20 minutes, a postal worker who spends his day dealing with frustrated customers gets to have a conversation about ideas and stories. That's significant. I could see confusion in their faces, their inability to comprehend how these small interactions could be viewed as meaningful accomplishments. When Sarah's son was in the hospital, I continued, I was able to coordinate support from the entire neighborhood because I had relationships with all these people you dismiss as just customers. We raised money, provided meals, offered comfort during a crisis. That happened because I'd spent 3 years building trust and connection. That's not just significant, it's essential. But Maya, my mother protested, these are all small things, local things. They don't have any real impact beyond this tiny corner of Ravensbrook. And what's wrong with that? I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. What's wrong with improving one small corner of the world? What's wrong with being the person who makes sure that corner functions with kindness and care and human connection? The question seemed to stump them. In their framework, value was determined by scale. The more people affected, the more money involved, the more recognition received, the more important the work. But I was suggesting a different metric entirely. Depth over breadth, quality over quantity, relationship over recognition. You could do so much more, Uncle Gerald said, his voice carrying a note of genuine bewilderment. You have the intelligence, the education, the connections now. You could influence policy, manage major projects, build something that affects thousands of people. What if I don't want to affect thousands of people, I asked. What if I want to affect dozens of people in a meaningful way rather than thousands of people in a superficial way? What if the work that fulfills me happens to be small scale but deep impact? The conversation was interrupted by a gentle hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Dr. Charlotte Vance, the chief medical officer my family had pointed out earlier as an example of real success. Excuse me, she said with a warm smile. I couldn't help but overhear some of your conversation. Are you the Maya Rodriguez from Moonbeam Cafe? My family straightened in their chairs, clearly hoping that another successful professional would support their perspective on my wasted potential. Yes, I said cautiously. I wanted to thank you, Dr. Vance said. My daughter Rachel is a nursing student at Ravensbrook University. She studies at your cafe almost every day, and she's told me how supportive you've been during her particularly stressful periods. You've remembered her exam schedules, checked on her when she seemed overwhelmed, even recommended study techniques that helped her improve her grades. She paused, her expression growing more serious. As a mother and as someone who understands the pressures of medical education, I can't tell you how much it means to know that someone is looking out for her emotional well-being. The nursing program has a high dropout rate, often due to stress and isolation. Students like Rachel need people like you, people who see them as individuals rather than just customers. My family stared at Dr. Vance as if she were speaking a foreign language. Here was another highly successful professional validating the very work they'd spent months trying to convince me to abandon. Rachel is going to be an excellent nurse, Dr. Vance continued, partly because people like you have shown her what genuine care looks like in practice. That's not a small contribution, Maya. That's foundational to who she'll become as a healthcare provider. After Dr. Vance walked away, my family sat in stunned silence. The evening had become a systematic destruction of every argument they'd used against my career choice. First Alexander Thornton, now Dr. Vance. Every interaction was providing evidence that my work had value and impact they'd been unable to see. I think, I said quietly, I'm ready to go home. As we gathered our things and prepared to leave the gala, I realized that the evening had given me something I'd been searching for throughout this entire ordeal: absolute clarity about my own path. Not because anyone had told me what to choose, but because I'd finally been able to articulate why my choices made sense to me. The drive home was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts about what the evening had revealed. But for the first time in months, my silence wasn't filled with doubt or guilt or fear about disappointing them. It was filled with peace. Tomorrow, I would wake up at 5:15 a.m. without an alarm clock. I would walk 3 blocks to Moonbeam Cafe and unlock the doors to a place where I belonged, where my work mattered, where I could spend my days contributing to something beautiful and meaningful. And for the first time since this whole battle began, that future looked not just acceptable, but perfect. 6 months later, I'm standing behind the counter at Moonbeam Cafe, watching the morning sunlight stream through our newly installed stained glass windows, a gift from Alexander Thornton's Community Development Fund, and marveling at how completely my life has transformed. Not in the way my family had envisioned, with corner offices and corporate ladders and six-figure salaries, but in ways that matter more than they could have imagined. The meeting with Alexander Thornton had been unlike anything I'd expected. Instead of offering me a corporate position, he'd proposed something far more revolutionary: a partnership. Pinnacle Industries would invest in Moonbeam Cafe as part of their community development initiative, providing funding for expansion, equipment upgrades, and a small business mentorship program that I would help design and implement. "We're not trying to change what you do," he'd explained during our meeting in his corner office overlooking downtown Ravensbrook. "We want to amplify it. You've proven that businesses can be profitable while prioritizing human connection and community impact. That's exactly the kind of model we want to support and replicate." The partnership had allowed us to hire 2 additional staff members, expand our menu to include locally sourced pastries and light meals, and most importantly, create the Ravensbrook Community Connection Program, an initiative that used the cafe as a hub for neighborhood support services, job placement assistance, and small business mentoring. Mrs. Holloway now volunteers 3 mornings a week, using her 42 years of teaching experience to help adult learners improve their literacy skills at tables we'd converted into informal learning spaces. James has become our unofficial community liaison, connecting customers with local services and resources during his daily visits. Dr. Vance's daughter Rachel graduated from nursing school last month and credits the emotional support she received at our cafe as instrumental to her success. But the most profound transformation has been in my relationship with my family. It didn't happen overnight. For weeks after the gala, they struggled to reconcile their embarrassment at being so publicly wrong with their genuine belief that they'd been acting in my best interests. The cognitive dissonance was almost painful to watch. Their inability to admit they'd been mistaken, warring with the undeniable evidence that my choices had led to recognition and opportunities they never could have imagined. The turning point came when the local newspaper ran a feature story about the cafe's community impact, highlighting our literacy program, job placement services, and role in downtown revitalization. The article quoted Alexander Thornton extensively about the business value of community-centered enterprises, and included a sidebar about my educational background and the skills I'd developed through 3 years of hands-on business management. My mother called me the morning the article was published, her voice tentative in a way I'd never heard before. "Maya," she said, "I read the newspaper story. I didn't understand. I didn't see what you were building." It wasn't a full apology, but it was acknowledgement, the first crack in the wall of certainty they'd built around their version of my life. "I know you didn't, Mom," I'd replied, "but that's okay. I didn't need you to understand for it to be real." The conversation that followed was the first honest discussion we'd had about my work in 3 years. Instead of defending myself against their attacks, I was able to share my genuine enthusiasm for what I was building. Instead of dismissing my choices, they began asking questions about the business model, the community partnerships, the long-term sustainability of what we were creating. Uncle Gerald, who had been my harshest critic, surprised everyone by offering to help with our small business mentorship program. His engineering background and corporate experience turned out to be valuable resources for entrepreneurs trying to scale their operations while maintaining their community focus. Trevor, perhaps motivated by guilt over his role in trying to undermine my confidence, became one of our most effective advocates in the young professional community. He started bringing his colleagues for coffee meetings, introducing them to our model of business success that prioritized purpose alongside profit. Even my father, who had been so convinced that my happiness was unsustainable, began visiting the cafe regularly. Not to check up on me or offer unwanted advice, but because he genuinely enjoyed the atmosphere we'd created. He started bringing clients there for informal meetings, telling them it was the best example of successful community-based business he'd seen. The relationship isn't perfect. There are still moments when their old assumptions surface, when they catch themselves measuring my success against traditional metrics before remembering that I've chosen a different scorecard entirely. But we found a new equilibrium based on mutual respect rather than disappointed expectations. More importantly, I've learned something about family that I never understood before. Sometimes the people who love you most are the least equipped to see who you really are. Their vision of your potential can become a prison that prevents them from recognizing your actual achievements. Breaking free from their expectations isn't about rejecting their love. It's about choosing to define success for yourself. Last week, I received a letter from a young woman named Jessica who had read about our cafe online. She was facing pressure from her family to leave her job as a preschool teacher and pursue what they considered a more serious career. Her parents couldn't understand why someone with her intelligence and education would choose to work with children for what they considered inadequate pay. "Your story gave me hope," she wrote. "It showed me that meaningful work doesn't have to be justified to people who measure value differently than you do. Thank you for proving that success can be defined by happiness and impact rather than just salary and status." I've received dozens of similar messages over the past few months, from people in small towns who were pressured to move to big cities, from artists whose families wanted them to choose practical careers, from social workers and teachers and nonprofit employees who were told their work didn't matter because it didn't generate substantial income. Each message reminds me that the battle I fought with my family wasn't really about coffee or careers or financial security. It was about the fundamental question of who gets to define a life well lived. If you're watching this and facing similar pressure from people who claim to want what's best for you, I want you to know this. You are not responsible for living up to other people's definitions of success. You are not obligated to pursue their version of your potential. You are not required to sacrifice your happiness to earn their approval. The work that brings you joy, the life that feels authentic to you, the choices that align with your values. These things have worth that can't be measured in spreadsheets or salary figures. Don't let anyone convince you that small-scale impact is less valuable than large-scale recognition. Don't let anyone tell you that work you love is somehow less important than work that merely pays well. Your family, your friends, your community, they might not understand your choices immediately. They might be afraid for you, disappointed in you, frustrated by your refusal to follow the path they've mapped out. But understanding can grow. Relationships can evolve. People who truly love you will eventually find ways to support the life that makes you happy, even if it's not the life they would have chosen for you. The courage to choose authenticity over approval is the hardest thing you'll ever do. But it's also the most important. Because at the end of your life, you won't be judged by how well you met other people's expectations. You'll be judged by how fully you lived your own truth. 3 years ago, I was a college graduate serving coffee and wondering if I was wasting my life. Today, I'm a community leader, small business owner, and social entrepreneur who happens to serve excellent coffee. The work hasn't changed, but my understanding of its value has been revolutionized. Don't wait for permission to build the life you want. Don't wait for validation to pursue work that matters to you. Don't wait for approval to choose happiness over status. Start now. Start where you are. Start with what brings you joy. The world needs what you have to offer, exactly as you are, exactly where you are, exactly as you choose to offer it. Trust yourself. Your life is waiting. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.